So we are continuing our sermon series called Missio Day. This is actually the last week in this sermon series where we're talking about the mission of God. We're talking about that. We're looking at the heart of God. And so here's what we're doing. Here's what the sermon series is. We're doing something new this year where we're taking very long sermon series and then kind of chunking them out. So the mission of God, we're actually going to do more of it next year and the year after that and the year after that and the year after that. All right, so we that's kind of the plan that we have going on here, because the whole idea behind the mission of God is we saw in John. Right after the resurrection, the disciples are in that locked room scared, and Jesus appears in the room and breathes on them. Hopefully he didn't have garlic knots in the resurrection, right? That he breathes on them, which means spirit, which means breath. It's all the same word in Greek and Hebrew. And he spirits on them, he breathes on them, winds on them, and says, just as the Father has sent me, so I'm sending you. And if you haven't been able to tell, we have been looking at this sermon series from the standpoint of just as the Father has sent me. What is the heart of God? What is his heart? What does he care about? What is all this going on? And that then informs us as Jesus sends us out. And this is kind of a transition one right as we begin, because we'll come back to this right after Easter next year. And some of you are like, dang, he's got his life together with these sermons. It's right, I do. I know what I'm preaching up to a month ago next year, right? In August next year. So we go in all this, and then we're actually doing it with the Red Letter Challenge. So we're doing Being Challenge this year. Next year, we'll do the Forgiving Challenge, okay? So that's kind of what we're doing. But as we go in here, we're looking at the staff. And I want to ask a question. I'm going to ask it a few times here in the sermon, is what is your staff? All right, what is your staff? And that's the important question. Now, the verses that kind of brought all this up is actually the epistle lesson, the second lesson, the long one that Harry read so expertly a little bit ago. Like that's that over there. But when you read that lesson, it can be kind of confusing. So it's important to look back at why all those words were written. So just really quick, we actually did a sermon series on 2 Corinthians back last fall. It was called Forgive and Give. It was giving in our reconciliation, right? And it was about 2 Corinthians. Because 2 Corinthians is a letter to the Corinthian church from Paul, basically apologizing and wanting to reconcile with that church. Because there was a lot of hurt that was going on here. Because he recognized when he wrote 1 Corinthians that the church was beginning to chase after all these glorious, grand preachers, all these glorious leaders that would strut around in robes made of white, right? Like that, and look awesome. That's all right. I guess it wasn't that funny, but it's a joke aimed at towards me. You know, he's looking at all these people, and he's like, "You're following after these people. These people are just trying to pursue power. They're trying to get you off the grace of Jesus, and all these things." Like when we talk about communion, we talk about it every week. Like this, some people aren't waiting for other people. Like they're going in and having communion. They're even getting drunk off the communion wine. That's not a good look. Getting drunk off of communion wine, right? And so he's saying all these things, and then I think he realizes he may have gone a little too far in some regards. He talks about there's a painful visit. He talks about a letter with tears, and I don't know that this written, and he wants to reconcile now. He realizes he's probably taken it too far, and he's working at reconciling with them. And one of the ways that he talks about reconciling is in our reading. Right at the beginning of it, in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 2, he says this. He says, "For in this tent," and this is kind of a microcosm of what he says all through this chapter. But he goes, "For in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling." Now, don't get caught up in the tent language or anything like that. Basically, what he's saying, some people are like, oh, this is Paul talking about how the earthly body is worthless and all that. Paul is not talking about that here. He's talking about how we know how we can feel in our own skin, in our own tent, right? How we can feel in our own skin that sometimes things are just wrong, right? And it causes us to groan, right? Like, it causes us to groan. Like those times that you go to Applebee's and you're like, this was a bad decision. Some of you are like, I like their microwave food at Applebee's. Like that's no, like that's fine. You can like what you like. It's fine. I've been throwing Applebee's a lot of shade lately. But we feel in our skin, in our tent, right, that we want out of here like when you lose someone that was extremely special to you. When you wake up in the morning longing to see that person and that possibility just isn't there, you groan in that. There's also times when you groan when you wake up in the morning at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday because your neighbor's mowing his grass. You groan and you're like, this is wrong, right? This is wrong. Like you groan when you realize that you fractured a relationship because you did something selfish. Right? You realize when you groan, you just feel that groaning in your skin, right? Like that's, like we groan all the time, and we groan when we turn on the news or anything like that. We just see all these things happening, and we're just like, oh my goodness. Like we groan with it. I mean, did you guys hear what happened in Jackson, Mississippi? Apparently it's been going on for years. Jackson, Mississippi doesn't have water right now. A city in America does not have water because deferred maintenance and all these things they just let go, right? But think about all those people, and we groan with them, right? It's just, we groan, we hear these things, and it's like, oh, this is wrong. It should be better, right? So what's your staff? What's your staff? Because this is the thing that I realized this week. Now, I've said this a lot of times during the sermon series already. I've learned something new this week. I'm probably not going to say that next week, and you're going to be like, he's rehashing old sermons, right? But I learned something new this week. I was listening to a podcast. I hear what some of you are saying. You're like, what's a podcast? But that's all right. But I was listening to a podcast, a Bible podcast. I'm a nerd, and I heard something about Moses' staff this week. And it's one of those things I'm almost ashamed that I didn't know about it before, because everything that I understand about the Bible and how I read it, when I put my biblical glasses on, I'm like, oh, that makes complete sense. And yet I've always overlooked this. And I'm so excited. I worry that I'm not going to be able to communicate it well. So let's get into it. When we think of Moses' staff, what do you think of? You think of old Chuck here, right? Like it's like him saying, like, let my people go, right? Like, and then like holding the staff open and holding the waters at bay so the people could walk through it, like this kind of staff at power. He's like hitting it at rocks and like hitting people with it and all kinds of things. All as we go through the Old Testament and the wilderness wanderings, like we think of this staff as power, right? But I ask a question: how did Moses get his staff? I don't know, right? Well, think about it. Moses, to quote Paul, had some deep, deep groanings in his life. Deep groanings. I think about the beginning of Moses' life. Pharaoh made an edict. He was scared of all the Hebrew people that were enslaved to him. So he had them kill all the firstborn sons. That included Moses. That sounds similar to Jesus. I wonder if they're connected. And Moses was part of that. So he's ripped from his mother as an infant. Groaning, right? Groaning. And also you have, we see him get raised then inside the family of Pharaoh. Things are looking up, like he's a prince of Egypt now. This is incredible. And then he ends up having this inner groaning. He has this inner groaning that says, and he realizes he's not an Egyptian, he's a Hebrew. And he goes out to go be with his people. He goes out there and he sees an altercation happening, and he ends up killing an Egyptian. And in that, when he kills that Egyptian, his own people reject him. They're like, what, are you going to kill one of us like you killed that Egyptian? And he goes back to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh finds out that he kills an Egyptian, and Moses has to flee. He has to flee out into the wilderness. I wonder if that's foreshadowing anything. I don't know. He flees out into the wilderness, and he becomes a shepherd. How did Moses get that staff? It's a shepherd's staff. That staff, he wouldn't have to be a shepherd. That staff represents all the groaning, all the hurt, all the pain, how he was taken from his mother, taken out of his home, how he killed that one Egyptian and has left him destitute and alone with no one to rely on out in the middle of the wilderness. That's what that staff means. And I know, listen, if you've listened to any sermons of mine, hopefully I've reconstructed what a shepherd means in the Old Testament, because we have things like the Lord is my shepherd, and we think like, oh, shepherds are these wonderful people, like the Lord is like my shepherd and all that, because I think we put shepherds on like the American farmer identity that we have created. Like, no, shepherds are out in the fields outside of the cities because they're not to be trusted individuals, okay? King David was a shepherd when he was a boy, and notice they didn't think he was king material, because he was just a shepherd boy. They left him out in the fields. Okay? So this idea of the shepherd, so Moses is living that shepherd, and one day he looks over to the side of him, and he sees a bush on fire, but it didn't burn up. And he went up there and he saw God in this bush. And he's like, just, oh my goodness. And God starts talking to him. He's like, I am who I am, like using all the God language there. And he basically says to Moses, you are going to go to Pharaoh. You're going to go back to Egypt. And you're going to say, let my people go, and all these things. And you're going to take my people out of bondage, and you're going to deliver them to freedom. Now, does Moses act like Isaiah? Remember when the Spirit of God comes to Isaiah, it's like, who will go for us? And Isaiah's like, here am I, send me, type of thing. Does Moses do that? No. He begins making excuses. And he begins making excuses right away. Now, here's the thing, and this is what I found. There are 3 excuses that are made. And 2 of them we talk about more than the other one. And we usually, us preachers really like the 3rd one, because Moses says this, I don't talk good. Like, they're not going to listen to me. I don't talk good. Us preachers love that one, because we like to say, it's like, oh, I don't talk to. But when we're at home, we're like, my tongue is like gold. Like all that stuff, you know? And so like God bless my golden tongue, right? Like that's like over there. So we love that one about the talking and how God will kind of lead through Moses through that. Then there's the other one that we know of, like Moses puts his hand in his cloak and it comes out leprous, and then he puts it back in and it's clean again. But the first one we don't talk about much. And it's the one that I was like, oh, today. And it's this. It's in our reading that Harry read in Exodus earlier. So God says, you're going to do all these amazing things. You're going to do all these things. You're going to tell these people, and Moses goes, but behold, there's that behold word again. They will not believe me or listen to my voice. They're going to say, like, Moses, you're crazy. The Lord did not appear to you. And the Lord said to him, Moses, what's in your hand? And Moses is like, my staff. Now, I don't think Moses said, my staff. You're like at a holy, like my staff here. What would you like to teach me about my staff, you know? I don't think he said that. He probably said it kind of like a snarky, like 13-year-old, you know? It's like, my staff, duh. Like that's, like you think, like it's just my staff. Like what of it? Like it doesn't mean anything. This is my hurt and pain and all these things that I've ever had in my life. If all these bad things hadn't happened to me in my life, if I hadn't felt these groanings, I wouldn't even be holding this staff. And I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now either. Like, thank you very much. Like that's, he would be talking that way as he's holding his staff. Now I hear what you're saying. You're like, what do you mean his staff means his groanings? this is a bit of a stretch. The first service laughed at that because they agreed. You guys are like, no, he's going somewhere with this. Because the very next verse is this. And God said, throw it on the ground. And so he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And it scared him, and he ran from it. You see that? He's a shepherd. Are snakes scaring him? No. Right? He picks those things up all the time, right? But this, he threw it on the ground, it turned into a serpent, and it ran from it. Why did it turn into a serpent? Because I think the super clever biblical writers that helped out Moses, all those things, like the super clever biblical writers are telling us a story. And you look all throughout the scriptures, Old Testament and New, the serpent is the image of evil and of the deception and of a cursed life, right? From Genesis chapter 3 all the way to the last chapter of Acts, where Paul is shipwrecked and he has to deal with snakes and serpents. From Revelation to talking about how the woman, or the end of, with the trampling on the serpent and all those things. Like all this stuff in the biblical understanding, we put our biblical glasses on, we understand that the serpent represents all of our groanings, and that shepherd's staff of a life fallen from grace, taken from his family, taken from his level of prestige, all the way down to his shepherd. That staff represents everything, a cursed life that Moses has. And what does God say? What's in your hand, Moses? That cursed life, that groaning life, that hurt life, that life that doesn't know what to do with itself. What's your staff? What's your groan? Because this is so cool. The next verse is so cool. Let me preface it just a little bit here. I think sometimes we believe that the Old Testament and the New Testament are different. They were like, oh yeah, like in the Old Testament, God was angry and vengeful and always sending out war and destroying people and all these things. And then all of a sudden, Jesus came and God became peace, love, and happiness, right? Like bunnies and unicorns and rainbows and all those things, right? I think we put that dichotomy on there. But God is amazingly consistent all the way through. And we see this consistency, this same mission of God that Jesus was showing us in the Gospels is all the way back here in Moses' time. Let me explain it to you. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put his hand out and caught it, and it became the staff again, right? So it's moving from the snake, and then this happens. And he goes, and the people, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. What is God saying to Moses there? I think God is saying that there's something inbuilt and deep within the creation, that when the creation recognizes that you have come as an ambassador of the Creator, when you have come in the mission of God, when you have come in the name of God, when you've come and God is with you, it is when you are leading with your staff, when you are leading with your groans, which is the exact opposite of how we love to do everything, isn't it? We love to we put those stuff aside. It's like, I'm forgiven, hooray, I throw all that stuff aside, I am perfect now. Come follow Jesus, be perfect like me, right? Because that's what you guys see in me. I get it. You look at me, that's a man who's got his life together. I get, why are you guys laughing? Speaking truth. But that's how we convey the message of the gospel, of Jesus, right? We convey that we're like, no, it's not about coming with my groans. Listen, I've been around for the ripe old age of 40 years. It's so old. And I've heard from the very beginning of throughout all time, that the church is declining. We're losing our influence. We're losing what we have. We're losing all this stuff. Like, people are leaving us and all those things. And I look at our response. And how have we responded? Have we taken up the staff, or have we tried to be like Pharaoh, where we have tried to lean into power, try to get the right people elected? They're going to show us, we're going to show them how powerful we are. We're going to make them believe. We're going to do all these things. We're going to legislate it. We're going to make it all happen. We're going to vote for all the right stuff. We're going to make all this happen. We're going to show them the biggest youth programs, the biggest program over here, the biggest program over here. We're going to show them the power, and they will know by our power that Jesus was with us. But has it done anything? Maybe there's something so deep within the creation that it can tell when we come with power that it knows we're not coming with God. But when we come with our staff, when we come with our groans, when we come with the hurts and the pains that we have dealt with, there's something inbuilt and deep within the creation that knows they have come with God. They have come with the Creator. Because we look at what Jesus did. Jesus didn't come in power. He came born as a virgin. I love the story of Jesus' birth, because it shouldn't happen. Because you know exactly, like if someone got pregnant in here and was like, honestly, I'm a virgin, no one would believe you, right? Like, go away. No, you're not. Yet that's the story. He was born inside of a manger, not of some palace of power. And in the Gospel of Luke, he was surrounded by shepherd staffs, right? That those shepherds, those outcasts, those ones that are on the peripheral of society, those were the ones that were preaching to everyone. Because that's how God comes in. And the world was recognizing it. That he came on not in power, but with the staff. And this is how the Apostle Paul puts it in 2 Corinthians when he's trying to bring reconciliation. He goes, for our sake, he made him, Jesus, to be sin who had no sin. For our sake, he made Jesus to take up a staff, to take up the groans, even though he had none, so that we might become the righteousness of God. This idea blew my mind this week. And what upsets me about it is this idea is what we've been preaching about for the last year. We've been preaching about power and all that stuff. And I was like, it's right here in Exodus. And you guys know how I feel about Genesis and Exodus. DJ and Katie especially know how I feel about it because I made them read it with me. I love this stuff, and yet I miss this. So let me end this here, and I want to end it on a different idea. Think about this. This is the transition into evangelism. Oftentimes when we evangelize people, the thinking behind it is, oh, I believe in Jesus. I believe that he has saved us. I have found the treasure, or something like that. But what we're basically conveying is, you down there, you 2 steps below me, literally, and that you need to acquire the right information that I have and believe like me in order to be saved. Now we kind of believe that, right? And we try to convince people of the faith, right? There's a whole thing called apologetics that does this. I'm not a huge fan, but we'll get into that later. But we have this whole thing, it's like trying to convince someone of the faith. How is this different? Are you ready? Instead of that, what if we went like Moses and we led with our staff? And when we went up to people holding our staff like Jesus was holding his wounds on his sides and on his hands. I'm not saying these things aren't forgiven. I'm just saying they're there. That we lead forward, and what we say to people is, God can use your staff as well. God can use your groans as well. And God can use your groans and your staff to bring health and freedom to the captives and sight to the blind. That it's not about coming in power and understanding everything, but it's rather coming with the cross of Christ and our own staff, going, God can use you as well. And when I hear that, that sounds like good news. And we'll end right there. Let's say a prayer. Jesus, we thank you that you love us and that you're with us. Lord, help us to see our staffs, to see what they are, to see what we can do with them. And Lord, send us out to the people around us that we may be encouragers in a world filled with groaning. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. So thank you so much for listening to